Hello YouTube, my name is Sam, and in this video I'm going to be doing a part 2 or a continuation of sorts of a topic I talked about at length in a previous video. And if you end up liking this video, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. So, in a previous video I talked about Florida's deepfake bill, aka House Bill 757, on how it went basically full on overreach by even criminalizing the mere creation and possession of sexually explicit deepfakes, even ones that are private and that are meant for private use and never shared. Now, in that video, I talked about how it violates a long-standing Supreme Court precedent towards private possession of entertainment in the home, and how it is basically tone deaf to how impossible it is to actually get consent to create files like that. And also how it basically will literally create victims if it's ever enforced on truly private, never shared files. However, since then, I've done a little bit more research on this and also some extensive reading. And basically, there are some things that I just have to mention here that warrants this follow-up video. Now, before I continue, I'm going to say what I said in my last video. Right off the bat, people who distribute deepfakes or use them for, blackmail or whatever should be punished. I'm talking about people who create sexually explicit deepfakes of adults or depicting adults for purely private use with no intention of sharing them. Now, with that being said, the first point I want to get to here is, how did this law come into effect in the first place? Well, I'll tell you. In 2024, I believe, there was a 17-year-old high school girl by the name of Brooke who had deepfakes of her created off of public social media photos from, like, say, Instagram or whatnot, basically turned into deepfakes of the sexual kind and then distributed everywhere, online, all over the place. And for starters, I think that this is absolutely horrible. No teenager or anyone really should have to go through that. However, it was her mother that pushed for stronger laws against sexually explicit deepfakes that led to the creation of House Bill 757, where lawmakers basically took a legitimate gripe and used it to basically get tugged at the heartstrings and create an overreaching mess that is House Bill 757. And also, by the way, just so you know, that's why it's called Brooks Law. Now, listen, I am not going to basically complain about people getting prosecuted for, creating deepfakes of someone underage and then distributing it. Pretty sure anyone can agree that that's wrong. However, when lawmakers introduce knee-jerk reaction type of laws like this, it never ends well. And that's basically what is happening, what is happening here with House Bill 757. All right, as I went to edit this, I actually forgot to mention something here that's basically very important. It tells exactly what's going on here. Florida's House Bill 757 basically works by telling people this. Let's say you come across a photo on Instagram of two attractive adult women posing together. And let's say you have a fantasy in your head of them engaging in a nice lesbian makeout session, French kissing, getting handsy, that sort of thing. If you have that fantasy in your head, that's perfectly fine. But if you ever use commercially available tech to basically put a visual to that fantasy for strictly private use with no intention of sharing it, we're not going to stop you, but don't ever let us find those files, because if we do, we will arrest you, charge you with a third-degree felony, and send you to prison, if convicted, with rapists, murderers, and terrorists for several years. Yeah, pure overreach at its finest, born out of moral grandstanding. And they're also basically, thanks to Marsy's law, telling these depicted women, who basically up until then had no idea these files existed, we're so gung-ho on saving you from hypothetical harm that we're going to inflict actual harm on you right now by letting you know that these files are out there and possibly even showing them to you. But anyway, back to the video. Now, in my previous video, I basically touched on how House Bill 757 will be extremely difficult to enforce on truly private, never shared files. Just how difficult will it be to enforce? Well, I'll tell you right now. All right, so basically what's happening here is that the only legal way that I could think of how House Bill 757 can be enforced on private never share files is if they are found during an incidental discovery during a legal search for something completely unrelated. That's it. How difficult will this be to enforce? Well, can the state direct law enforcement officers to come to your house, knock on your door, and demand to see your hard drive? Nope, can't do that. Can they, for example, during a traffic stop, demand to see your phone to see if you have any generative AI apps on your device? Nope, can't do that. Can they rely on a tip? Can they rely on a tip as weak as, hey, I think this guy's producing deepfakes? Nope, can't do that either. Can they rely on somebody posting a video criticizing the law as enough evidence to get a warrant? Nope, can't do that. And that's also, by the way, protected First Amendment speech. You can, it's a bedrock First Amendment right where you can actually criticize government policy without the government coming after you. So they can't do that either. Now, some time ago, I think it was last year, there was a rumor going around that the Attorney General or some other lawmaker was going to start pressuring Grok, Midjourney, and some of the other AI companies into suspending users and reporting their creations and prompts to law enforcement if they suspected that it was, of a sexually explicit nature. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat that this rumor turned out to be not true. But let's say it was. That would indicate a lack of understanding, or really a complete lack of understanding of how AI works, and also of how the Fourth Amendment works. Let's start with AI in general. There is no AI tool currently available at all that can basically detect whether an image was created with or without consent. The burden of that falls entirely on the end user. And quite frankly, in order to even make that possible, Florida would probably have to set up a call center-sized team of human review agents who would basically just review deepfakes day in and day out to see if they were of the non-consensual, sexually explicit nature. And then they would probably have to do a reverse image search to identify the women in the deepfakes, and then call them to ask them, hey, did you consent to this? Which, by the way, as I explained in my first video, will lead to the exact emotional harm that the law is supposedly designed to prevent. But doing this would also basically reveal a profound lack of understanding on the Fourth Amendment. Because when you pressure a private company, or really I should say when the government pressures a private company to basically do something like this, report user prompts and user creations to law enforcement, it basically turns them into what's known as a state actor, where any deepfake files found become basically inadmissible in court because it was basically found during a warrantless search. And basically, once that happens, the state will not be able to build a case anyway. It'd be completely useless at that point. Now, the third thing I want to get is, what would happen if a law was passed that would basically take House Bill 757 and turn it federal? Well, there is a representative that is actually trying to do just that, Nancy Mace, who, I forget what her exact name of her bill is, but it would basically make the creation and possession of sexually explicit deepfakes not just a state crime, but a federal offense as well. Now, first off, this would basically cause a huge amount of problems for both AI companies and law enforcement in general. Let's start with the AI companies. If sexually explicit with deepfakes were made illegal at the federal level, AI companies would probably be pressured or basically encouraged to basically encode every single creation with a digital barcode that would then basically be able to be read by any cloud-based service that a user backs them up to, that would probably then report the files to the FBI. And I can tell you right now that it would basically be commercial suicide for the AI companies once people found out that they were doing this. And by the way, I also think that the AI companies themselves wouldn't be the ones to snitch on its users because, quite frankly, again, it would be commercial suicide that would result in the mass exodus of their user base. This would also result in Amazon and other retailers having a sales surge of flash drives as people start to move their creations, if they chose to back them up, to non-cloud services that won't snitch on them if they decide to go that route. Plus, all the problems that Florida has with their deepfake law would basically be amplified to a national level. Number one, victims created through enforcement, the lack of admissibility. If AI companies plus that human review team that Florida would have to hire would probably be amplified, and it would basically be bogged down with noise from all the false positives. And by the way, Nancy Mace should know better than to actually, being a rape victim herself, should know better than to call sexually explicit deepfakes digital sexual assault, okay? And that's actually something else I want to get to. That's actually brings me to another point about this. All right, basically there are quite a few people, including Nancy Mace, who have actually basically said that sexually explicit deepfakes are digital sexual assaults. What an insult to actual rape victims. Rape and sexual assault, the real kind, involves an actual person being violated and touched and assaulted without their consent. There is actual tangible harm involved with that. Whereas with deepfakes created for private consumption and never shared, the harm is purely philosophical or hypothetical, but there's actually no tangible harm. There's no victim, there's no, assault, nobody's being touched, harmed, or exploited. It is extremely insulting to actual rape victims to call sexually explicit deepfakes created for private use digital sexual assault, okay? And by the way, I actually ran across a comment on one of those feminist Instagram accounts saying that even private deepfakes needs to be treated by the legal system like child sexual abuse material. Okay, slow your roll down here, because she actually mentioned that not only should a person be arrested for deepfakes, but they should also be put on the sex offender registry. I just want to mention real quick here that if that was to actually happen, it would dilute the sex offender registry, because look, I am all for somebody who harmed children being put on it. Don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, if people who were arrested for creating and possessing deepfakes were put on it, you would not be able to know if that person was arrested for harming children or arrested simply because the state decided to get involved in him, using available tech to basically create a visual to a fantasy. And once a person is on the sex offender registry, it would basically create huge implications for his social life and his employment life and basically anything else in his life, because he would be prevented from finding a good job. He would almost impossible to find a dating partner because, if once a woman sees that, they're out. In addition to that, he might even be able to have a tough time finding a place to live. So to the people who actually want to compare adult sexually explicit deepfakes to CSAM, slow your roll here and shut up. Because the reason why child sexual abuse material is illegal to possess is because every possession fuels a market, which leads to more real-world victims. Whereas AI deepfakes are just pixels. Okay? No one's being harmed, touched, or assaulted, okay? Just like I said in my first video. You cannot compare the two, so shut up about it. Alright guys, I have decided to chop this video into two parts. I'm going to be putting part 2 in the description box below, and I will see you on part 2. Take care. Alright guys, before I actually begin part 2 of this video, I just want to mention something that I want to get off my chest, because I know that there's going to be this particular accusation flung at me, and I just want to squash it before it even starts. Recently, I was chatting with a person I know about this, and I was telling him as a casual mention that I seem to be the only one, or one of the very few people, who are willing to go this in depth about how bad this law is. And he said, and I quote, "That's because no one gives a shit about Florida criminalizing the creation and possession of sexually explicit deepfakes. The only people who would actually care about this law are the ones that are creating deepfakes and are now too scared of being arrested over it." Okay, number one, I have a First Amendment right to criticize government policy. And two, criticizing bad policy is not the same as admitting guilt. Because now I understand that there's going to be people that'll be like, well, why are you criticizing it if you're not doing it? Well, that's understandable on an emotional level, but it's not a very serious argument. Because if that was the case, anyone who's ever criticized any bad law ever would be guilty. I believe that marijuana should be taken off Schedule 1 and regulated like alcohol and tobacco. Does that mean I'm a weed smoker that deserves to get his house raided? I believe that that prostitution should be legalized, even if it's just kept to tightly regulated brothels. Does that mean I should be investigated for soliciting prostitutes? No. Again, criticizing bad laws does not mean that I'm actually doing what the law criminalized. Okay? That's not how a free society works, to just accuse people of stuff just because you personally don't agree with it or don't like it. But anyway, now that I've said that, on to the video.